Okay, getting back here. Brittany mentioned that she didn't have the Chantui because the companies were out, and also she's just getting her pharmacy going. Um, there's another time when we're just getting our pharmacies going. There's another time that we have to learn how to be flexible with herbs. But also because it's kind of sketchy, we have less and less herbs available all the time for us now, and that's a real problem. So um, we do have to learn how to be flexible, and at the same time acknowledge that there's some herbs that we actually can't reproduce any herbs because each one is so unique, and but at the same time, in a practical way, we have to learn how to be flexible to do what we got to do. So both of those are very important points. Okay, because things just aren't available all the time, and uh, hopefully we're going to be able to get this whole Chinese herb thing integrated in a good way over time, that supply and demand will equal each other, and it's all going to work out in a good way. But until that time, we do have to learn how to be flexible. So like that. All right. Now, let's keep going here. Where were we? Okay, so how many acrid cool exterior releasing herbs are actually cool? All right, so let's take a look at them. Okay, we took a look at one of them when we were working with Brittany's formula here, and that is shengma. And yes, I will share that with you. Okay, shengma. So it's acrid and it's sweet. So it's acrid, cool, sweet. This is our first herb, I think, that we're seeing that is both acrid and cool. So here's shengma going from cool to slightly cold. Okay, this is good because it gives us a pretty definable temperature range here. Okay, cool to slightly cold. I like that because it's pretty accurate. Okay, one of the many things that's so interesting about shengma is its temperature. Okay, even its territory, because it has such a strong ascending quality. Okay, but it doesn't have any fire in it, right? There's no fire there, so that's an interesting curiosity. Okay, but we can use this ascending quality to assist the digestion and a number of other things when we want to raise the qi. Okay, so that sheng and shengma means to raise. And it raises the qi very powerfully. So we never want to use too much of it. We just want to use a little bit, especially if we're using it for the digestion, because we don't want to go cross purposes and wind up. So what it's doing, what we want it to do is we want it to raise the spleen qi, but not the stomach qi, because when we're raising the stomach qi, what happens? We get nauseous. Okay, so we got to be careful with that. And the spleen qi, remember, spleen qi, because we are using both the spleen and the stomach here, so that's going to open up that that Biao Li relationship in the low. Okay, spleen qi going up, up and through a lot of its channel, right? So spleen qi does go up, so we want to hook onto that ascending quality, right? And we have a stomach low even that also runs contrary to the flow of the rest of the channel, that runs up, right? So it runs up from Feng Long and goes up into the abdomen. So, but we want to be a little bit careful, not do it too much, just enough to just sort of pick up that function, okay? Yeah, so that stomach low separates its stomach 40, okay? And it goes up the leg and connects with the spleen, Jing channel, okay? And that Foot Yangming stomach low actually goes all the way up and connects with gallbladder 20. Okay, so frequently we don't think of gallbladder 20 when we're thinking of the stomach, but when we talk about the stomach low, it's important because it goes right up back there. Right? And another branch of that channel also flows up the thigh and up the thigh and into the torso and up into the nape of the neck, also into gallbladder 20, right? So it has a double function that goes into the gallbladder 20. So interestingly, sometimes we want to keep this in mind with our acupuncture also. We can treat gallbladder 20 occipital area stuff with the stomach channel if we are activating below. So you could treat that with stomach 40, interestingly. So again, there's this connection with gallbladder 20 that we're speculating about earlier with some of those other gallbladder relationships with Mudze. All those different gallbladder relationships that are going on with Mudze, right? So this gallbladder 20 is another connection. We don't want to forget about that very, very powerful point back there, okay? So here we go with our next herb. Again, this is going into our lung liver territory, which is, we also use this recently, which is Juhua. Another pretty simple herb, just with this lung liver, or we should say liver lung neighbor. Acrid, sweet, bitter. So it's got a kind of a complex taste. But the temperature of it is pretty stable, cool to slightly cold. Again, it's a pretty precise definition, and I found that that is true. So again, what is this herb going to be doing? What does this herb do? Well, it cools. It cools, it activates, it nourishes, it consolidates, it disperses, descends a little bit, just like that. So this is a definitive, classic, acrid, cool herb from this category, okay? And this does everything that we expect it to do. There's nothing contrary with Juhua here. It does everything that it's advertised to do. So thank you, Juhua, for just being straight, okay? So again, it's got external wind covered through the lung, internal wind covered through the liver, okay? In all different combinations. This is really about clearing warm wind, which is what the category is supposed to be about. We also have that sweetness and the bitter added in with the acrid, all right? So it's more dispersing and more supportive at the same time than a lot of the others that might just be acrid and cool. Juhua is also a very primary antitoxin herb for us, okay? Because it uses both the lung and the liver systems to neutralize and disperse toxins. So don't forget it when we're neutralizing the toxin. Don't forget about Juhua, especially if it has anything to do with anything in the lung or the liver system. Okay. So we want to go more strongly into that toxin cleaning dimension of Juhua. We can start using its wild cousin here, which is the Yejuhua, the wild one. Yejuhua. Right? Okay, so it's just bitter and acrid. Okay, and lung and liver cold, slightly cold. So it drops the sweet. So interestingly, as it drops the sweet, the Yejuhua is more well-known for cleaning the toxin. So that's the one that you go for when the toxic element is pretty strong. You use the wild one, wild chrysanthemum, okay? So it's interesting that it's not that you add something, but the bitter becomes primary. The bitterness becomes primary with that cleansing and cleaning action, okay? For the clearing and cleaning action, okay? With the Yejuhua. So that's pretty easy to remember. More poison, Yejuhua, okay? So it's not as supportive, it's more cooling and more dispersive, okay? And then finally, we get to an herb that is just plain cool. And we've also talked about this a little bit in other contexts already this weekend. The Yizhixiang, right? Yizhixiang. Okay, it's acrid, it's bitter, and also cool, and goes into lung and liver. Okay, which I would say It's a little more acrid and more lungish than Juhua. Okay, it's more acrid and more lungish than Juhua. So it affects the lung more. Yeah. And that finally brings us to another herb that's just acrid and cool. This is another herb we want to use all the time, which is boho. Ta-da. Okay, very simple. It's cool, it's acrid, goes to the lung and liver. Okay, so this is gold for us because it's got a useful number of parameters that we can use, okay? Or easily usable. We can always use all the parameters of the herbs, but how much calculation is it going to take? Sometimes it takes a lot. So when we see lung and liver, I see, like the X of a truss there, right? So I'm thinking, okay, if I'm going to build out a lung formula, I would be looking for large intestine, probably over here, right? And that would actually work out well with the liver as well, wouldn't it? Okay, and then maybe we would, on the other side, we would do some gallbladder points there, right? Which works out well with the liver, but it also works out with the lung in terms of target relationship, like that. Or we could do large intestine and UB, right? Liver combines with a bunch of things pretty easily, right? So liver, we could also do the small intestine too, right? Although that wouldn't skew it for the lung so well, but it would skew it better maybe for the UB. Okay, but it goes great with the liver. So anyway, we want to start thinking about this. This is also when we want to use that Mingjie Formulary Companion Volume 6, okay, which is based on the number of herbs that are in the the number of channels that are in the herb. Okay, so sometimes like when we have lung and liver, and we know there's a certain number of channels that we want. If we want to keep it really simple, or if we want to bring in other things, we can do it by number. We can take a look at the number. Okay, well, I know right here, I know I want to have two other channels that are involved so that we can get a nice truss going. So let's just say we want it to be a large intestine and gallbladder. Okay, so we could go and find an herb, hopefully, that just goes through the large intestine and gallbladder and gallbladder channels, and it will also be able to address the temperature and taste qualities that we want. Okay, so that's one of the ways that you can use number. There are more esoteric ways you can use number also, but for now, pretty frequently we know, okay, we want something that's going to do this. You could go to those number charts and find it in that way pretty easily. Okay, so anyway, that's boho. So boho is another one of our classic acrid cool herbs, all right? So it gets us into the territory of rashes and treating rashes. This is another important dimension of liver, lung. We were talking again about that with Brittany's formula, right? And the blood and its relationship to the skin, okay? And I know we've already talked about Gugun a lot today, so we don't need to keep talking about it because we've already talked about Gugun's relationship with the blood and the skin a lot during the day already. So we don't need to flog that course. Let me see if there's anything going on in the chat here. Okay, no questions so far. So far, so good. All right. So for the Gugun, I'll just mention finally, it's used to balance the yin and the wei. So I'll throw it up for you just to take a look. We looked at it so much. Gugun is really a rock star in terms of our herbs. We use it a lot more than you would suspect because the patients keep coming in. Okay, so there's Gugun. All right, so there's a lot of different synergies in there that you can see, right? You've got the stomach spleen, Biaoli. You've got a name relationship with the large intestine and the stomach. You've got a clock neighbor with the large intestine and the stomach also. Assuming that Yang Ming really means Yang Ming. meaning the entire Yangming channel, all right? Possibly we have another name with the small intestine, the UB, with the Taiyang there. We got Biejing with spleen and the small intestine and the clock neighbor, right? We also have the Qian-Ho relationship. Remember that Qian-Ho relationship, which is the front and the back between the stomach and the urinary bladder, okay? So this is important. These are all important factors, okay? So Gagan is used to balance the yin and the wei. That's one of the classic functions of Gagan, is to balance the yin and the wei. So it's important to keep that in mind. It's a little bit more on the surface action than on the blood itself. It balances the yin and the wei. Right? So we really get quite a spectrum here with these acrid cool exterior releasing herbs that actually are really critical for the use of our, for using in our formulas to address the different levels of the illness, and sometimes opening gates from one level to another level to allow the illness to escape, okay, right? Okay, so how many acrid cool exterior releasing herbs aren't cool? There are 11 of them, okay, but some of them sort of cross cool in their temperature fluctuations. So some of these are a little less known, but they're all very useful in their time and used at the right time. Never forget the timing thing. So let's take a look. Okay, first one is Wu Tian, right? Some people use this, some people don't. It's sweet, acrid, and bland. I like it. It goes to the lung. It's cold. So we know that it's supportive. Okay, it's stimulating, it's supporting, it's opening. It's working in that metabolism, that water metabolism via the lung. Okay. It's a great UB synergist for so many things, right? It's cold and lung. Wow. You can use it for UB, you can use it for large intestine, you can use it for in all these different ways, right? Okay. It could be a spleen synergist for a lot of things, also a large intestine synergist. It could be a liver synergist, all depending on how you want to use it. Okay, Wu Tian's coldness can be really helpful in a lot of those situations to clear heat and also open up the water metabolism quickly through the lung. So the lung does a lot. The lung is kind of like that bellows that they talk about in the Tao Te Ching. That bellows that's going back and forth. It's cooling. It's pumping fluids around like that. All right. We already talked about the Shuang Liu Huang. But I'll throw it up again just for a moment here. Shuang Liu Huang. Okay, again, we took a look at it earlier. Bitter and neutral. That's why I like it. It's not acrid. Again, it's not acrid. Bitter and neutral is this interesting combination because it clears mildly through dispersion. That's how it works. Okay. So this is for, we would use the Shuang Liu Huang for a mild pathological heat that's affecting this particular Liaoli relationship of the lung and the large intestine. That could be happening in the throat also. It's a typical use. It could be happening in the throat, but it could be happening in the sinuses. It could be happening in the intestines. It could be all of those things. Could be all of those things. So would we use Wu Tian by its, would we use the Shuang Liu Huang by itself? Probably not. We'd probably combine it in clever ways to emphasize either the lung or the large intestine. All right. Or we might emphasize that relationship by using other large intestine lung Liaoli herbs. Okay, so that's another way you could go with this. Or you could use it to enhance and modify a spleen stomach formula, okay? that has those different Biaoli herbs, that would be a totally different situation, right? So you can see how flexible all of this is. Sometimes we use it for one function in one place, but we could use it for another function in another place. Okay, so in the classes, we're focusing a lot on comparing these individual herbs with each other, all right? But I don't want us to lose our skills in combining, because that's really important. That's what really makes us Mingjie, right? So over the course of the classes, we're going to make a lot of fancy combinations. We're going to keep doing that like we were doing earlier. And so that'll keep us in practice. So don't worry, even though I'm talking a lot about these individual herbs, we're getting to learn about these qualities that we then start assembling them together into these different structures, okay? All right, Sangye, this is another herb that we talked about earlier. In the context of Britain's formula. So let's take a closer look at what that is. Sangye. Well, how useful is this? Okay. Bittersweet, acrid, cold, okay? And look at all these synergies. We've got lung liver going on. We've got liver, large intestine going on. We've got stomach, large intestine going on. Okay, a lot. We've got this fluid connection with the stomach and the lung. It's a lot. It's a very, very active herb, okay? It is a perfect balance herb also, but not for the lung, okay? It's not bad for the lung, but it's a perfect balance herb for the large intestine, right? Perfect balance herb for large intestine. So if you want to pull out your balance charts, you can have them ready if you need them, you know, but most of us have internalized at least the majority of what's on these charts at this point, okay? But also remember, it's no shame to use those charts. We want to use them because the last place to keep information is in our head. Okay, we don't want to gum up our head and our brain with all this, with all these facts too much, because that reduces our abilities to be nimble and flexible and be able to work. Okay, so Sangye, what can we say about Sangye? All of its taste plus its coldness is all focused on the large intestine aspect of the Yangming. Okay. So this is about external pathogenic heat hitting where? In the throat and the sinuses. That's really what it's about. Okay? External pathogenic heat hitting the throat and the sinuses. But it could also easily address like pathological heat attacking the large intestine itself. Why not, right? In fact, our model of this might be a great herb to use for dysentery, wouldn't it? Very good herb to use for dysentery. The liver is involved with that, the large intestine, the stomach, right? All of these things could be quite good for the dysentery, and to help to clean it out and consolidate and do all this. Okay. So we're talking a second ago about combining. Okay, a lot of times we see Sangye paired up with Juhua, like in Sangju Yin, right? We see that pairing up happen a lot. Okay, so let's put them together right now. Let's see what that looks like. This is a classical herb combination. Okay, so what does it turn into? Okay, we've got a lung and liver stack. So right away, we can see this is lung liver stack plus Yangming. Okay, so we're vertical stacking all these different things. We got that liver lung clock relationship going on. So whenever we think of that, we want to think about allergies, autoimmune kind of situations that with that liver lung. All right, plus we're stacking tastes as well. Okay, we're stacking the bitter, the sweet, and the acrid, all of these. So That makes it kind of a taste trust if you look at the way that that's all set up in the pharmacopoeias. All right, so we can balance principles with the tastes also. We can use those balance principles to address tastes as well. So what does that do? It makes all the qualities stronger and more reinforced with each other in our enhancement of synergies. So we want to look at the structure of the taste also, and we can do funny things with that to help to balance, right? Because again, remember, the order of those tastes is what tells us the relative predominance of the taste in the herb. So that's how we use that. Okay. All right, and we're even stacking temperatures here when we put these things together. The coldness of that Juhua when it happens, and the coldness of the Sangye, in that range of cool to cold. And plus we're stacking aromatics, which also always makes things kind of more zippy and volatile. So that's how all those simple combinations work to create these very powerful effects. It's about all these multiple levels of synergy, all the ways that we can stack up these different qualities to get more and more powerful, about these different qualities uniting with each other and doing like that, okay? So simple combinations can work to create really powerful effects, okay? So it all depends on how things stack up. So simple combinations can make very powerful effects. So, so again, stop looking for those magic, holy grail, messianic herbs. We can do it virtually anything that we need to do with these very common herbs. All right. Okay. So let's keep going. The next one we're going to look at, another one of my favorites. This is another cooking herb, the dandocher. Dandocher. Acrid, sweet, slightly bitter, and aromatic. Can be cold or warm depending on the type of preparation. So that means however you wind up processing it initially, but also however you wind up using it in the formula is going to make it either go to the cold side or the warm side. Okay. So it also has our trinity of tastes for acrid, cool. It's both acrid and, well, it's cold or warm depending on the situation, right? Exterior releasing herbs, okay. It's temperature, depends on the type of preparation. We can use it a bunch of different ways. Fermented things are really interesting. So this is one of our fermented herbs. Those fermented herbs are really interesting. They're very important for us to experiment with and to revivify those fermenting processes. I think is super, super important. Once upon a time, I'm sure there were different kinds of ferments with a lot of our Chinese herbs. And any way we can experiment with that, I think is very, very helpful for us because that fermentation helps to make things more easily digestible. And it also, there's certain alchemy that can happen with the fermentations that allows different aspects to come out of the herbs. Some of them to leave entirely and others to get stronger. And a lot of times that's very beneficial. Plus you also have all these beneficial bacteria and whatnot that help us to digest them. So it's a really, really good thing to do. So we want to revivify it. In the old days, you know, in the height of the Chinese culture, every food actually had its own perfect fermented complement. So if you think about it, it's pretty amazing. Every single food had its own fermented complement. At one point, Confucius said, going through life without studying the I Ching is like eating without the proper pickles. That's what that means, that everything had to have a way to help you to digest it. So he's saying the I Ching helps you to digest life more efficiently. That's one of the things that he's saying with that, okay? So one of the main things that we lose as we age is our digestive capabilities, okay? So that digestive capacity starts going down. At the same time, this really sucks because our Jing starts vanishing too at the same time. So there goes our sources of qi right out the window, okay? So eventually that only leaves us with the air to breathe in our qi factory. So our two more substantial sources of qi start dropping away. The Jing and the food that we eat, our gu qi, right? So we want to support and nourish our digestion for as long as we can. That's really important. So that way we keep the basis of our gu qi really strong, strong as possible for as long as possible. But I think that's a very, very important priority as we age, okay? And things like doucher can really help us do that, but it has to be the real thing. It has to really be fermented for it to work, not fake factory fermented. Like they fake a lot of that stuff to make it seem like it's fermented and it's actually not. So, and we want to make sure there's not a bunch of preservatives in it either. That's kind of a given, okay? The real thing, the doucher, really smells quite weird when you smell it, and that's how you know it's a good one, because it has a very strange smell. You know, in the old days, every culture had its own fermented foods, but with industrialization, that practice has pretty much gone away. I mean, there's kind of, you know, wealthy hippie circles, the fermentation has come back to some degree, right? But when food industrialized, we lost, virtually everybody lost their traditional fermented foods. And people started buying stuff at the store that actually usually wasn't fermented in in a good way or fermented at all, but they maybe put vinegar with it and stuff like that to make it taste as if it was fermented. But it's not an accident that our health started going away at the same time that we started eating industrialized food. So, so doucher is really important because it gets to the root of what we're doing with these external release therapies, and it also helps with our digestive processes in that way, right? The acridity is blowing things out, along with the bitterness to help to clean, as well as disperse our own internal. So it goes down into the lung and the stomach, and it stimulates them to move the pathogens out. Okay, it consolidates the basis of our postnatal qi. It supports the fluids. It supports the blood. All supporting all those things to help to move things out. Remember, so when we're moving things out, we're externalizing. We don't want to do it too much and make it empty inside, or else something else is just going to come in, right? So we want to develop this fullness, and then from the fullness, we release the exterior. It's very different than just going, oh, and getting something out of the exterior, and then we wind up empty inside, and then that's just going to create other problems. So it has to be solid all the way through. This is why we use things like doucher, okay? So why is doucher the basis of Chinese cooking? It's in so many things, right? Okay, it's the basis of Chinese cooking, because we want to keep this kind of process going all the time. It's just blowing out the little things so they don't accumulate over time. Okay, so little attacks of wind come in. We don't want to just hold on to it. We want to let it go, get it out, get it away, send it on its way like that. Okay, so doucher is a very, very safe herb to use and to experiment with. Okay, and it shows you how a little bit of something that smells and tastes really bad. Like you smell it, you think, God, why would you want to eat it, right? But when you use it properly and you put it in with the rest of your food preparation, it makes the whole thing delicious. So that's really interesting. And it's kind of a fascinating question, how a little bit of something that tastes, that maybe smells so bad could wind up making the whole thing taste so good. There's a lot of Chinese medicine in that doucher. So let's not overlook it. So anyway, we can see that we can learn a lot about the categories and the intentions behind the categories when we explore these different kind of mechanisms of the herbs themselves, right? This is how we learn about what category really is, rather than just taking the sort of soundbite definition of what a category is about. Okay, what's next? Okay, we also saw this herb today. and that is Niu Bangzi. Another herb that's perfect to use at the perfect time, but we want to be careful not to bring out rashes if rashes are nowhere on the table beforehand. It can be tricky with patients because sometimes, frequently, if people have different kind of viral loads, it's easy to get it to start expressing as a rash. People don't always want that, but it's better than keeping the virus inside, is my opinion. But you gotta know what you're doing when you're doing that in terms of getting rashes to come out at the surface. So Niu Bangzi, it doesn't have any sweetness, but it's a lot more dispersive and cold than some of the other stuff that we've been looking at. Niu Bangzi is a classic for superficial hot pathogens in the throat. Right, so that's what it's classical use for. It's the superficial hot pathogen in the throat. Okay, and it also helps rashes to express through those yin wei mechanisms that I was describing a little bit earlier. Yin and wei. That's what it's working with. Okay, Niu Bangzi should go through the large intestine channel. Okay, why? Okay, it doesn't. We see it doesn't. It's not said to go. It's not stated to go through the large intestine channel, but it really should because it's a seed. The Niu Bangzi is a seed, and the seeds are very often said to enter the large intestine channel, and that's probably why, because the seeds make you go to the bathroom. The Latin name for Niu Bangzi is also really interesting. It lets you know, my ancestors right on the money with the cold idea behind Niu Bangzi, right? It's called Arctium. Arctium. So don't forget to look to all the different names of these herbs, because sometimes you can get some great insights into what they're about. Like with this one, Arctium. Do you think that's an herb that might have a cold quality? Of course it's going to have a cold quality. That's why it's called Arctium. Okay. All right. What's next? Manjingzi. We've looked at this so many times in so many different ways, and there's always another way to look at Manjingzi. So here we are. Here's Manjingzi. Okay, we got to look at it again and again because it's so bloody complex. Look at all these channels. Okay, no sweetness in Manjingzi. And look at that interesting temperature evaluation again. It's both cool and warm at the same time, remember, okay? So it doesn't fluctuate from cool to warm. It's actually both at the same time, which is kind of interesting. Temperature doesn't need to be exclusive, but a lot of times we assume that it is, but it's not exclusive. That means exclusive would mean it's either, it's either cold or it's hot. But this shows us, Manjingzi shows us, actually they aren't exclusive. We can have them both at the same time, right? And that's true also with the people that we know. It's true with human beings, isn't it, right? Don't we all know people who have a combination of temperatures going on? They might be very warm on one level, but very cold on another level, right? Or vice versa. That happens with people. So the herbs are mirroring what's happening with people. And hopefully flipping it around, reversing it, and balancing what's going on with people. That's what we're looking for. All right. I think I remember in our earlier classes when we did those exercises once upon a time, a lot of us experienced different temperatures in different parts of our bodies, right? So, that's the same is true with the herbs. Why would the herbs be any different, right? So for our convenience, not for our convenience, none of this is about our convenience, but it is amazing the tools that we have and what we have to use. So many tools, and we have to expand this in our lifetime. So it's critical for us to do experimentation with anything that we find and see, but I think particularly with plants that grow in our area, plants that are native to wherever we live. It's really important to learn what those things are. to learn what the tools are that are readily at your disposal, and also to protect them for that very reason. So, Manjingzi, let's get back to Manjingzi. It's rooted in this in our liver lung clock neighbor dynamic, okay? And it's it channels all of our foot yang channels plus the Sanjiao, okay? So it takes that liver lung clock dynamic and then channels out through all those foot yang channels plus the Sanjiao. So it's a very, very, very interesting herb. So here's our foot yang. Here's our foot yang channels right here, and whoops, I forgot the R on that one, but that's okay. Okay, so there's our foot yang channels plus the Sanjiao. Okay, so we have this lung liver dynamic, right, which we will always want to think maybe it's somewhere on the spectrum of autoimmune, maybe coming or going, plus the Sanjiao, okay, which is really links everything together, plus all three of these foot yang herbs to really, really get that stuff dispersed out. All right, so that's a very powerful territory to have, okay? So it's got a very strong Xiaoyang flavor, doesn't it? Because of the Sanjiao and the gallbladder together. So we're beginning to look at what might happen when the wind and the heat begin to penetrate a little bit deeper than the surface, okay? It's kind of like when Jingjie showed up in our last category. Suddenly we have Xiaoyang showing up. All right. Okay. So then Mao Zedong To comes back again. Remember, that's our sweet herb that works at liver gallbladder, Biaoli relationship plus the tie-in, the lung and the spleen. Okay. So again, tie-in. Mao Zedong To, let's put that up there. We keep running into this herb, which is interesting because we keep pulling it in for different reasons at different times. So that helps us to remember these sort of off-brand herbs. Mao Zedong To. Remember, this is the sweet and neutral one, so that's why I like it. Okay, so tie-in plus liver gallbladder Biaoli. Okay, it's neutral again. Okay, it's got a little bit of toxicity. Okay, which means we'll use it to address toxicity when that pops up. Okay. Definitely happens with external wind heat invasions. That's one of the first things that happens if it doesn't get treated properly, is it starts going toxic, okay? But again, the sweetness and the neutrality of Mao Zedong To tell us that this is for a pretty mild toxin when it shows up, okay? It's nothing that we need to pull out the big guns for. That's not what this herb is about, all right? We see this a lot also in with Western medicine, where the answer that they have to virtually everything is just kill everything in the body and see what rises from the ashes when they're done. But we also see it in our own medicine too, in my opinion, too often as well, where inexperienced practitioners wind up treating a level of toxin clearing that isn't appropriate for the actual condition, right? So it's really important to pace how you're doing your cleaning and your clearing and your cleansing. You want to make sure to get all the toxin out, but you don't want to drive too deeply. You don't want to drive the toxin deeper in. You don't want to damage the whey and all kinds of stuff like that. So it's quite complicated, but it's not out of the reach of what we can do diagnostically or clinically with all these different tools. Okay, so we don't want to be one of those practitioners that winds up driving a pathogen deeper in the body or doing something crazy like that. Okay, so over-treating can become a really serious issue. I've seen this with COVID, not very recently, but a few months ago, because people were, when they got COVID, the people who could afford it, they wound up doing like all these different therapies at once. Okay, they took the ivermectin, they did the They did the immune therapy for it. They did all these things, and a lot of the people wound up. I saw a lot of people that over-treated when they got COVID, and they wound up pushing a whole bunch of stuff into latency. And it's going to be a little while, probably a few more months before that really comes flying back out in another form. So we have to be careful. We have to be careful with over-treating, because when we over-treat, we wind up creating damage. All right. So we don't want to complicate our lives or the lives of our patients with doing that. All right. So we want to try and get the right tool for the job. Okay. Take care of what needs to be done, and then let the body build its strength and let the body build a robust Zheng Qi. That's really, really important. Now, it's important when we're talking about Zheng Qi and talking about strengthening the immune system and blah, 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 that kind of an idea. You know, human beings can only get so strong, and our Zheng Qi and our immune systems can only get so strong. So there's always going to be something that's going to be powerful enough that no matter how we could be perfect in every way, and something will come along that's strong enough and specific enough to just blow us away and swat us down. So we want to really remember that, okay? That even the Zheng Qi is not invincible. And all this over-treatment that people are getting is making them weaker and weaker. Whereas if we help to cull these diseases out, it actually strengthens the Wei Qi in the process. Okay, so we see the kids getting vaccinated at younger and younger ages. We want to vaccinate some kids at birth, which doesn't make any sense because babies don't have any immune systems. So there's no possible way the vaccines can work. And so we're going to have an entire generation of people whose Wei mechanism is totally thrown off. All right. So that's important to keep in mind with what's coming up, because that's going to be coming up soon. All right. And people are just getting more and more dependent on these failing medicines, and that's not a good thing. Okay. And phony doctors. So we don't want to be a part of that scenario in any way in our strife for integration, our strife to be accepted. It's a very toxic relationship. So we want to be careful. We don't want to become the Z-Pak doctors of Chinese medicine and overtreat, right? Whereas Sifu Lai used to say, don't be a Fuzhi doctor, right? Don't be a Fuzhi doctor, because there's some doctors who do that. They just use Fuzhi to treat everything. That's kind of like using the steroids to treat everything, which is sort of the default last-ditch attempt when in Western medicine they don't know how to treat something. All the time they just throw steroids at it. Well, it's like being a Fuzhi doctor. So we don't want to be the equivalent with what we're doing. Okay. I'm going to check the chat and see if there's any questions here. Not so far. All right. Okay. So what's next? Here's an interesting herb we talked about a little bit earlier. And that herb is the herb is Fuping, if I can ever get it big enough for you to see. There we go. We took another look at this earlier. Again, it's pretty simple. It has a simple combination. It's got this Biejing relationship between the lung and the UB going on, and it's cold, and it is acrid. Okay, so acrid, cold, and going through the UB. So it's going to be stimulating and cooling at the same time. So remember, we have to learn how to distinguish, which is not easy to do. Distinguish between the temperatures, the tastes, and the territories. So this is acrid and cool, going through this Biejing relationship between the lung and the UB. It's also a clock opposite relationship. So it's a double relationship. It's an interesting herb that actually brings us clear back out to the surface too. Okay, with that lung and UB connection. That's what we were talking about earlier with the Ma Huang. Okay, if this is acrid and cold versus acrid and warm. And so when we were looking at our comparisons with the Ma Huang and seeing how we could artificially reproduce Ma Huang's effects, while Fuping passed down the line, but we see it's actually cold. So it has similar effects in some way in that it's liberating the surface, right? But it's cold, okay? It's very dispersing. This herb is very dispersing and very scattering of external wind. wind heat anyway, and surface issues, okay? Why? It's got a floating quality. How do we know it has a floating quality? Because it's called fu ping. And the fu means floating, to float, okay? So that's how we know that. Here, we can put fu up for you. Fu up for you. There's fu, like that, okay? It's kind of an interesting character, the classical character for it. This is water over here, right? And this is a baby. And we know what happens when babies go in the water, they start drowning. So this is a hand that's like pulling the baby up by the hair, right? So anyway, that's what fu is. You see that baby getting pulled up by the hair with that floating quality. That character cracks me up. All right, Mudze. We've talked about Mudze. We've discussed a lot already. And I like its wide temperature profile. Okay, I'll just put it up so you know what we're talking about. Okay, Mudze doesn't have any fu in it. So there's Mudze, all right? Remember, lung, liver, gallbladder, okay? So we got these different relationships going on here. So in my experience, Mudze's temperature varies a lot depending on where it grows and how it's grown. Okay, so it can grow in a bunch of different environments, and that's seems to me what is what determines what temperatures it winds up becoming from neutral to slightly cold. All right. But it's also interesting that this herb is so popular as an herb supplement. I don't know what people are using it for, but it's a very popular herb supplement. People use it all the time. You can find Mudze at virtually any health food or health store, like in these places that sell supplements. The Tail is always there. I think people use it for beauty because it has a lot of silica in it. So they do a Western chemical analysis, and it has a bunch of silica, so people think it's going to make them beautiful. So that's why they take it. But for us, we know Mudze is good for all kinds of different things, especially for heat conditions that are affecting the eyes, right? Any heat condition, internal, external, especially if there's wind, okay? Don't forget all the ways the gallbladder crisscrosses over the skull also, okay? Remember what's on the inside of that egg of our skull, okay? It's the brain. So we can definitely use it to help to adjust with the brain, okay? And while we're talking about that, we can go back to Chantui for a second, because there's some strong similarities here. And we wind up using them together a lot. All right, is that Chantui? Okay, so when we compare the two, there's no gallbladder here with Chantui, is there? No gallbladder, and then we got two sweets, so we're stacking sweet. No bitter down here, but there's bitter up here, so we wound up with something that's bitter, salty, and bland. Okay, so it's dissolving, it's getting rid of fluids with the Chantui. Okay, whereas the Mudze doesn't quite do that. The Mudze is more clearing than cleaning. Okay, but the reason why I mentioned it here is because Chantui also helps to regulate the small vessels anywhere that these channels go, and more actually. So these two herbs, Mudze and Chantui, are very important for regulating the vessels, so don't forget that, okay? That brings us back to Gehua, which we looked at earlier, okay? So then that is just goes through the stomach channel. So it's very, very simple herb for us to keep in mind. Here's our Gehua, right? Okay, and then back to Dojun, okay, which we looked at before as well. And we're looking at these herbs in different contexts. Here's our Dojun. Right, which is sweet and bland. So we can start, So we can start comparing these. these different herbs. Okay, so this is just the stomach. This is the stomach and the spleen. So we want to build these hierarchies of herbs in our minds. Okay, and then finally we have chai hu, which also we visited earlier in another context. So here comes chai hu. Right there like that, okay? Which brings our pericardium in, Sanjiao, Sanjiao gallbladder, liver pericardium, right? So we've got a double name relationship there, which I think is very, very useful, okay? Sort of the quintessential acrid cool herb. It's both acrid and cool. It's also bitter, so it's more dispersive and cleaning than some of the other herbs that we've seen. Wide temperature range that includes cool, goes from neutral to cool to slightly cold. Okay, just and look at that territory, it's really juicy, huh? And it also is a perfect balancer. Remember, we want to look for these kinds of synergies, these kind of trusses that can happen within the herb. So that means it's going to be a very strong and stable and powerful herb to use. Okay, so when you look at all the ways that this herb balances inside itself. Okay, that's why chai hu is so popular and such an important Chinese herb. You can use it for so many things depending on what you stack with it. It's already solid, but you can stack it in a bunch of different ways because it has that solidity. Okay, just remember chai hu can be quite drying because of that bitterness and acridity at the same time, and also because one of the reasons why it's drying is because it goes through those critical blood channels. Okay, and the entire Shaoyang. Okay. And remember, Shaoyang is the hinge. So it's easy for that to dry things out. Okay, so please always remember, support the blood when you use the chai hu. Okay, how are you going to support the blood when you use the chai hu? You're going to use bai xiao, you're going to use shou wu, you're going to use go qi zi. All right. And just like we discussed at the end of our first Mean Jay series, whenever we're cleaning wind, we need to support the blood. So that's why we need to do that. Okay. So if you remember that, it's going to save you and your patients a lot of grief, because when you don't support the blood, it winds up turning into all kinds of other freaky symptoms. So, so we want to always keep that in mind. Support the blood with bai xiao, at least bai xiao, and if there's any sort of exterior stuff going on, just keep it with the bai xiao. And past that, always use the shou wu and the go qi zi. Very, very neutral, very easy to assimilate, and will support the blood pretty easily. Okay, so. I'm going to say, let's wrap it up for this weekend here. I'm going to ask you if you have any other questions for now. If not, I want you guys to stew in your own formulas for a while, for the next couple of weeks, and then come back with questions. I want you guys to experiment a lot, both with yourselves and with your patients. Try to use what we're talking about so that it's going to be heavily using these first two categories of herbs. Try to figure out when you want to use them. Okay, when do you want that stimulation? When do you want to activate? Okay, so if there are there any other questions? If not, I'm gonna ramble. All right, I'll see you guys in a couple of weeks. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you guys. Bye. See you next time. 谢谢。